Alright, so then you have to open the lower esophageal sphincter and the bolus enters the stomach. Again, the sphincter is a circular muscle, but it looks like a sheet here. What it's showing is just like if you take a donut and cut it in half, that's what you're seeing here, except it's a very squished up donut there. Alright, so this is a cadaver stomach, and it looks very deflated, like a deflated balloon, but I guess they emptied out the contents of this person's stomach before they took the picture. So yeah, you notice that the stomach is below the diaphragm, so the esophagus actually has to run through the diaphragm, and then it connects with the stomach below the diaphragm, and again below and inferior. So your stomach, notice that it's not quite symmetrical in your abdominal cavity. It's actually more, the body of the stomach is slightly offset to, or more offset toward your left. Okay, so then what are the major functions of your stomach? Well, digestion, right? But what specifically? Well, the thing about your stomach is that it can store a lot, 2 to 4 liters. And again, if you're not familiar with the metric system, just pick up a liter bottle of soda or water or drink, and that's how much a liter is, and then 2 to 4 of those can fit in your stomach. So your stomach is amazingly flexible and can expand to a very big volume. But the thing is that it's also important in physical digestion. So again, physical digestion is the physical actual mashing up the food in your body to break it apart into smaller pieces so that chemical digestion is more effective. And then chemical digestion, so your stomach also has its own host of chemicals that help to break apart. And it's not just acid, it's also it's also its own set of enzymes as well. And signaling and hormone production. So again, the stomach is not a primary endocrine organ, but does have its own set of hormones that it secretes and tells, especially other digestive organs. Like the digestive organs like to communicate with each other via hormones. So they all produce hormones. Now, I go pretty late on the hormones in this one because there's actually a dozen or so digestive hormones, and I have to pick my targets for this class. So know that the stomach does produce hormones, and it is important for the overall activity of your gastrointestinal tract. So here's the anatomy of the stomach. Now look at it, it's pretty, so again, it looks like a pretty round, it's like a bean-shaped organ, but it's really big. And the thing is that what we have here is the esophagus, and then the major parts of the stomach. Let's go over major regions of the stomach. So we have the cardia. So the cardia is the first part of the stomach that receives the bolus. So it's directly connected to the esophagus, and that's the first part it enters. Then you have the fundus, and whenever you have a fundus in anatomy, it usually refers to some sort of hump on an organ. So it's kind of like a camel's hump. So this is what we have here with the fundus of the stomach. It's this raised part right here that's to the left of the esophagus. That's what we have with the fundus. And again, this is anatomical left, not the picture left. And then you have the body. So the body is the bulk of the stomach. And then once the food enters the cardia and the fundus in the body and turns and mixes out, it has to exit somewhere, right? So the cardia is the entrance and the exit is the pylorus. So the pylorus connects to the small intestine, and the first part of the small intestine that links the rest of the small intestine and the pylorus is called the duodenum. Or I've heard duodenum. Again, tomato, you're not being tested on pronunciation in this class, not even in the lab class. But again, go with whatever your preceptor tells you. And then notice that the stomach, again, it's not exactly symmetrical. It has if you look at it from the frontal view. So it's a lesser curvature. Again, why? Because it's shorter in length than the greater curvature. So these are gross anatomical landmarks of the stomach. Now, the thing is that the stomach, like your esophagus, has multiple layers. So it has a mucosa, a submucosa, muscularis externa, and a serosa. So what we have here are layers upon layers, and actually their stomach is very muscular. It not only has a muscularis externa, but there are 3 layers. So there's an oblique muscle layer, and this is your outside mucosa. So oblique means at an angle if you were here for PHYL 141. So compared to something that's a rectus muscle or straight, an oblique muscle is usually diagonal, and that's what we see in the fibers along this length. Now, then you have a longitudinal muscle layer, so it roughly goes along the longitudinal axis of your body. So this is the outermost layer of the stomach. And then there's a circular muscle layer that's kind of going perpendicular to that longitudinal layer. So you have that longitudinal layer on the outside, you have that circular muscular layer going perpendicular, and then you have that oblique layer, that's the innermost layer of the stomach. And yes, there is a sphincter right before the duodenum. So, okay, but to backtrack, that's again, I have to emphasize that the diaphragm, your esophagus does run through the diaphragm. So your diaphragm does have a hole for your esophagus to run through and connect to the cardia of the stomach. Then you have the lower esophageal, or sometimes called gastroesophageal sphincter. So that's the first sphincter. And again, sphincter is a ring of muscle. So when muscle contracts, what does it do? It gets smaller, right? So it gets smaller, it shuts it off, but if it relaxes, it opens up. So then you also have the pylorus, and then there's the pyloric sphincter. So yes, there is another ring of muscle. So when your stomach is mixing out things, or mixing all of the it receives a bolus and then makes it into acidic byproduct called chyme. So what it does is, like, you have to seal it, otherwise when you try to mix it and contract this muscle, it's going to squeeze out both ends if you don't actually constrict these sphincters and seal it up.